My name is Chris. This happened many years ago, and to be honest, it's a memory I'd tried to bury until recently. That summer, I was 17, working the night shift at a pizza place on the outskirts of my hometown. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the job, but with an empty wallet and two parents ready to kill me if I stayed unemployed, I didn't really have the right to complain. You know the kind of job I mean. It's one of those you take because nowhere else is hiring. Slow nights, greasy uniforms, and a beat-up delivery car that struggled just to make it up a hill. At least it wasn't my car. That would have been even worse. Oh, and this might not seem important, but I have to emphasize this. The pizza there was unbelievably bad. Seriously, it was awful. I could never understand it. And honestly, I still don't know why anyone in their right mind ever ordered from that dump. The crust was always soggy. The cheese tasted like rubber, and the sauce had this weird metallic aftertaste. If it weren't for the fancy online ordering system and the halfway decent seating area, I swear to God, we wouldn't have had a single customer. That place is easily one of the things I miss the least about my hometown, and that's saying something. The only comforting thing about working there was that, maybe because the pizza sucked so bad, or maybe because the place was so far out of town, or both, hardly anyone ever ordered from us. Most nights were dead quiet. I won't bore you with the dull details of how my shifts usually went. It was a pizza joint. I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. Folding boxes, mopping floors, pretending to look busy. Until one night, I was stocking the fridge with sodas when the tablet beeped. An online order. A large pizza, sausage and olives. I remember it clearly, because we never got olive orders. It was almost a joke. Who even eats olive pizza? The address was way out in the middle of nowhere, well beyond our normal delivery range. I remember getting ready to hit decline, out of habit. Orders like that were usually pranks from kids, or worse, a mistake that would waste an hour of my time for nothing. But before I could, my manager, Russell, a guy in his 30s who mostly sat in the back scrolling through Reddit, looked up. His eyes were red from staring at the screen too long. He told me to take it anyway, saying we hadn't had a delivery in over an hour. "Just go," he muttered. "Could be a good tip." I didn't argue. With Russell, everything came down to how the numbers looked at the end of the night, no matter how ridiculous the order was. So, when that weird pizza finally came out of the oven, I punched the address into my phone and grabbed the box. At least it'd kill 30 or 40 minutes. As I was heading out into the car, I looked more closely at the delivery note that Russell had printed and stapled to the box. It was something I hadn't noticed before. It read, and I remember this word for word: "Park on the road behind the house. Walk through the backyard. Knock only on the back door." That caught my attention. It wasn't just leave it at the door or don't ring the bell. It was specific, weirdly specific. But then, my 17-year-old brain started coming up with all kinds of reasonable explanations. Maybe they didn't want to wake up an elderly person or a baby. Maybe the front door was under repair. Maybe they were hiding the delivery from parents or a spouse. A guilty little midnight snack. Could have been any of those things. Besides, all I could think about was how painfully slow that night had been, and how much longer it would feel if I just stayed there folding boxes. I wanted to get out, to drive, even if it was a pointless trip. So I decided to just do my jobs. But the second I stepped outside, I started to have second thoughts. It was one of those summer nights that felt like walking through soup, hot, humid, and completely still. Like even the air itself was trapped in some kind of invisible jelly. I don't know if this makes sense, but there's that sour, stale smell you get when the air is thick and windless, kind of like sun-baked plastic and dust. That's exactly what it smelled like out there. I hated that smell more than anything, but it was unavoidable. It clung to your clothes, to your skin, I rolled down the windows for maybe 2 minutes before giving up and blasting the AC, turning the inside of that beat-up delivery car into a tiny, frozen oasis. The delivery address wasn't in the same direction as town. It was actually the opposite way, despite the pizza shop already being practically in the middle of nowhere. The trip was supposed to take just over 25 minutes, but it felt a lot longer because the roads were completely empty. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit. It's not like there were no houses for miles, but the farther I drove, the thinner the population got. Houses grew farther apart, then gave way to thick, shadowy woods pressing in on both sides of the road. Streetlights vanished. When I finally reached the address, I realized the GPS had routed me along a tiny side road that ran behind a row of backyards. I was literally pulling up behind the house. There wasn't a single streetlight. None of the houses had porch lights on either. Everything was swallowed in darkness, a heavy kind of darkness, almost physical. I remember slowing down, glancing between my phone screen and the view outside, double-checking the house number because the place looked completely dead. No lights inside, no car in the driveway, just a sagging backyard overrun with waist-high weeds and a leaning wooden fence that didn't even close all the way. The whole place looked abandoned, forgotten. A lump of unease crawled up my throat. Every instinct in me was screaming, "This is wrong. Turn around?" But I followed the instructions anyway. Knock only on the back door. I was 17, and honestly, the fear of Russell chewing me out was stronger than the vague fear of a dark, creepy house. I parked on the gravel shoulder, took a deep breath, and grabbed the pizza box. The moment I stepped out of that air-conditioned bubble, the humid heat slammed into me like a wall. I started up the small slope toward the back door, pizza in one hand, phone, with the flashlight on, in the other, shining it at my feet so I wouldn't trip over anything hidden in the tall grass. The weak light made a small white circle on the ground, which somehow made everything beyond it look even darker. When I reached the top of the slope, I saw it, the back door. One of those old white doors with a little glass window at the top, covered by a cheap beige curtain. I knocked. The sound was faint, hollow, swallowed by the still, heavy air of the night. I stood there and waited. Nothing. No footsteps, no TV sounds, no barking dog. Just the pounding of my own heart in my chest. I knocked again, a little harder this time, knowing my manager would lose it if I came back with that pizza still in hand. I even called out, "Pizza delivery." Still nothing. I sighed, frustrated. I was about to knock a third time, a solid, heavy knock, when I saw it. The curtain. The curtain on the little window. It moved. Not much. Just the tiniest twitch, like someone had used a single finger to lift it aside for a split second. It was so quick. I might have missed it if I hadn't been staring right at it. My eyes locked on that window. 1 second. Then another. I stood there, frozen, waiting for whoever was clearly standing just inches behind that door to finally open it. I could feel them there. I could feel their eyes, watching me through that thin layer of fabric. But the door never opened. The silence was somehow worse than any sound could have been. Right before I could process the fact that the curtain had moved, before I could decide whether to knock again or just run, the backyard suddenly lit up. 2 sets of headlights swept across the grass, flooding me in white light. They came out of nowhere, from the narrow back road behind me. 2 unmarked sedans pulled up and stopped right behind my delivery car. My heart skipped. My first thought was that I was in trouble. Maybe I'd trespassed or disturbed a neighbor. One of the car doors opened, and someone stepped out. Even from where I was standing on the small slope, lit by the other car's headlights, I could tell it was a man. He gestured for me to come over. I did, still dazed, half thinking maybe this guy had ordered the pizza and I'd just beaten him home. But as I got closer, I saw what he was holding. A badge. He was an undercover cop. I could tell because he wasn't in uniform, just plain clothes. As soon as I was close enough, he said, flatly, "Go back to your car and wait there." That was it. That's all he said. His voice was deep, firm, and left no room for argument. So I did exactly that. I backed away slowly, climbed into the car, slammed the door, and just sat there, watching. That's when I realized there weren't just two of them. There were 5, maybe more. They poured out of both cars like shadows. All of them had flashlights, but none of them said a word. They moved quietly, spreading out, surrounding the house like they were trying not to be seen. None of them knocked. None of them announced themselves, which struck me as really strange, but it was surreal, watching it unfold. One of the officers approached the back door, the same door I'd just knocked on, and gently tested the handle. When it didn't budge, he nodded to another officer and stepped back. They moved with the kind of cautious precision of people who knew exactly what they were dealing with. It felt like I was watching something I wasn't supposed to see, and I'm pretty sure I was. Eventually, the first officer came back to my car and leaned down to my window. I rolled it down. He glanced at the pizza box sitting on the passenger seat and let out a short sigh. He spoke vaguely, careful with his words, but he didn't seem like a bad guy, just someone trying not to say too much. Basically, he told me there was an ongoing investigation involving that property, and that he and the other officers were monitoring it. He apologized for taking so long to intervene and said I'd shown up right when they were rotating cars. I asked if he wanted to see the order, and he nodded. I pulled it up on the delivery app, but it was clearly useless. Just a phone number attached to the address and a name, Jerry. The officer jotted the number down, then told me to leave. Immediately. His tone wasn't apologetic anymore. I told him my boss was going to kill me if I went back with the pizza. The officer just shrugged. "Your boss will understand," he said, though we both knew Russell wouldn't. Then he repeated himself, firmer this time, "Go." And he turned away. I was pissed off, but what could I do? I started the car and drove off. It took the whole drive back for everything to really sink in. I didn't grasp how serious it all was until I stepped out of the car back at the pizza shop. If the cops hadn't shown up right when they did, something bad, something really bad, could have happened. I don't even know what. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the police presence was probably the only reason the person inside, that shadow behind the curtain, didn't open the doors. But why? Why would anyone order a pizza if they were being watched by the police? Maybe they didn't know they were under surveillance. Or maybe they did. Maybe I was part of some kind of test. Maybe I was the bait, to see if the cops were really watching the back of that house. Let's see if the feds show up when a pizza kid knocks. The twitch of the curtain, the silence, the timing. I don't know. What I do know is that I'll never get an explanation for what happened that night. Thinking about it now feels like a waste of time. I probably would have forgotten the whole thing if one of my old high school friends hadn't brought it up last week. At first, I didn't even remember. Maybe it's better if I forget it again. But before that happens, I figured I should share it here. This happened just last year. I'm 40 years old, married, with 2 boys, one 7, the other 5. I work in insurance, which sounds boring, and honestly, it is. But we live a stable life, and at this point in my life, that's all I really care about. A few years ago, my father passed away after a long battle with cancer. He left behind a beach house in Delaware that I'd never actually visited before, since he rented it out most of the year. It wasn't fancy or big, just a small, old-fashioned wooden house, weathered from years of sun and salt air. but it sat in a great spot, only 1 block from the boardwalk, and my favorite part, by far, was the second-floor deck. You could sit there for hours, feeling the ocean breeze and staring out at the waves. And after he died, we started visiting the place every summer, turning it into our family getaway. A week here, a weekend there. It slowly became our little tradition. My wife and I loved it, but our boys loved it even more. They could spend hours on the beach, building strange sandcastles or riding their bikes through the quiet little seaside town. That house felt like a gift, something my dad had intentionally left behind, a peaceful legacy for us to enjoy. The terrifying part happened during one of those trips last summer. We'd gone down in mid-July, a Sunday to Friday kind of trip. We liked going midweek, when the crowds thinned out and the beach felt almost private. There's something magical about having a stretch of ocean all to yourself, and I remember that night perfectly. It was a Wednesday. The sky was clear, no clouds at all, and the sound of the waves was soft and steady. The boys had passed out around 9:30, completely wiped from a long day in the sun. My wife and I were out on the back deck, playing cards and sipping wine. It was one of those perfect moments, and then that perfection broke. My older son, Jordan, slid open the door and stepped outside. The door made a soft scraping sound. He stood there, in just his pajama shorts, looking uneasy. He told me he kept hearing a scratching noise in his room and couldn't fall asleep. I looked over at my wife. She shrugged. I set down my glass and stood up, telling Jordan I'd check it out. I told her to stay put. I figured it was just the usual sounds of an old house. After all, it was a wooden structure that expanded and contracted with the temperature. The creak of timber, the wind, maybe a mouse, maybe a squirrel in the attic. Nothing unusual. The boys had separate rooms, so I didn't bother waking his little brother, Scott. I followed Jordan downstairs to his room. It was dark, lit only by a faint glow from the streetlight outside, filtering through the curtains. He pointed toward the wall near his bed and motioned for me to be quiet. We both stood there, in the almost perfect silence of a sleeping house. At first, I didn't hear anything, just the low hum of the fridge downstairs and the distant, rhythmic sound of the waves. But I didn't want him thinking I didn't believe him. So I waited, listening harder. After maybe 20 seconds, I finally heard it. Faint at first, but definitely there. A soft scratching sound, exactly like he'd described. Scratch, scrape, scratch, scrape, up. It's probably just a mouse, buddy, I whispered but Jordan shook his head hard, his eyes wide. I crouched down and pressed my ear to the cool drywall. The sound wasn't like something scurrying in the attic or above the ceiling beams. It was lower, closer to the baseboard. It didn't move quickly or randomly, the way mice do. It was slower, more deliberate. And then I heard it. A sound that froze every drop of blood in my body. It wasn't scratching anymore. It was breathing. Not an animal. Definitely not. It was a deep, human breath, raspy, labored, a long, slow inhale, followed by a shaky, almost trembling exhale. It was right behind the wall, just inches from my face. I stumbled back, instinctively whispering, "Oh my God, ew." And then, I swear I'm not exaggerating, the moment I said that, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, pressing down on the room. And then it came. A growl. The angriest, most guttural sound I've ever heard, erupting from somewhere inside the wall. It wasn't a normal scream. It was deep, raw, filled with rage and something primal, like pure hatred. It hit me so hard, I screamed out loud. A surge of pure terror, raw animal panic, slammed into me like a wave. It froze me completely, like someone had just poured a bucket of ice water down my spine. That primal kind of terror, the kind that tells you you're standing way too close to something that's deeply, fundamentally wrong. It took over. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed Jordan by the arm and yanked him out of the room. He stumbled, but I pulled him back up. We sprinted down the hallway toward Scott's room, my younger son, still sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the nightmare that had just woken up inside our house. I didn't give him a chance to open his eyes. I didn't say a word. I just rushed over, scooped his small body off the bed, and held him tight against my chest. Jordan clung to my shirt, trembling. The only thought in my head was that I needed to get back to the deck, where my wife was. That was the only way out. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I shouted her name. "Sarah, get to the deck! Lock the door!" And then I heard it. Another scream, but this time, it wasn't coming from inside the wall. This time, it was behind us, in the hallway we'd just come from, and it was a lot closer. A sickening crack echoed through the house, the sound of wood splintering from inside Jordan's room. I turned, heart hammering, and that's when I saw him. In the dim hallway light, a figure emerged. But man doesn't really feel like the right word. He was covered in dirt, cobwebs, and something dark and wet I couldn't identify. His hair hung in greasy clumps across his face, barely revealing his wild, rolling eyes, white and furious in the dark. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and his chest was heaving like a bellows, and he was charging straight at us. I nearly tripped as I spun around, bolting up the stairs with both boys in my arms. Scott started to stir, half awake, confused, but Jordan stayed silent, frozen with fear. I could hear the man's bare feet slapping against the wood behind me. He was growling, a sound that didn't even seem human. We barely made it to the top, and burst out onto the deck. I don't even remember how, but somehow I threw both kids toward my wife and spun around just in time to slam the sliding glass door shut. Bang! Not 2 seconds after I locked it, the man hit the glass with his full weight. The impact was brutal. I honestly thought it was going to shatter. The entire frame shook, and I heard a sharp crack as a spiderweb fracture spread across the bottom corner. He started clawing at the glass like an animal, his nails screeching across the surface, leaving long, filthy trails. He screamed and pounded the door, shouting words I couldn't make myself repeat. But one phrase cut through, clear and furious, over and over again. "My house, get out. This is my house." I threw my whole body against the door, gripping the handle with both hands, yelling over my shoulder, "Sarah, call 911, get the kids away from the door." Even in shock, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the boys, covered their ears, and pulled them to the far corner of the deck, shielding them with her body. I kept my eyes locked on his, trying to block his view of my family. He was wild, completely unhinged. His eyes darted in every direction, wide and bloodshot. Then he raised one of his hands, covered in, I don't even know what, dirt, blood, maybe something worse, and smeared it across the glass, leaving a dark, greasy streak right at eye level. He kept pounding, trying to pry the door open. I have no idea how long it lasted. A minute? 5? It felt like forever. He had this impossible, manic energy, and I was using every ounce of strength I had just to keep that door shut. All I could think about was keeping my family safe. I was ready, if the glass broke. I'd fight him with everything I had, whatever it took. But before that could happen, the police finally arrived. They must have come around the side of the house, following my wife's desperate call, because within seconds, I saw 2 officers inside, charging down the hall toward the man who was still slamming against the door. One of them tackled him hard from behind, both of them crashing to the floor. The other officer rushed in to help pin him down, The man's screams turned into these low, guttural growls as they forced him to the ground. The rest of that night was a blur of chaos and confusion. The moment they cuffed him and dragged him away, the adrenaline drained out of me, and my legs nearly gave out. My wife ran to me, both of us shaking uncontrollably. The kids were crying in the corner, pure terror written all over their faces. Once they'd hauled the man out of my house and into the back of a patrol car. The officers came back inside, their expressions grim under the porch light. They asked for my version of what happened, and I told them everything, my voice trembling, broken. Then, with 3 of the officers, I went through the house again, trying to figure out how that man had gotten inside the walls, and how he'd moved so fast. We went back to Jordan's room, and there, inside the closet, behind an old chest I'd never bothered to move, we found it. Turns out, the house had a crawlspace I knew nothing about. But it wasn't a typical one you could barely squeeze into. This was something larger. There was an entry point beneath the back porch, cleverly hidden by lattice and thick overgrown bushes. You'd never know it was there, unless you were looking for it. From there, it led into a narrow, standing height crawlspace that ran along the foundation of the house. And here's the worst part. It had a second access point, a loose panel, sloppily cut, on the back wall inside Jordan's closet. I couldn't believe it. I'd never done a full inspection when I inherited the place. Hell, I hadn't even redecorated it. One of the officers shined his flashlight into that dark hole. The smell hit us immediately, a foul stench of unwashed skin, mildew, and rot. We all took a step back. Inside, it was a nest. Trash, empty cans, chip bags I recognized as the brand we bought, and a pile of filthy rags clearly used as bedding. He'd been living there, right under my children's feet, the entire time we'd been staying in that house. A few days later, I got a call from a detective following up on the case. He told me the intruder, a local drifter with a long history of mental illness, had confessed to everything. He admitted he'd been living in that crawlspace for months. He'd found the entrance during the off-season, when the house was empty, and he'd decided it was his new home. He'd been stealing food from us, which explained the times things went missing, and we just assumed we'd misplaced them, and from the neighbor's trash. But this is the part that still chills me. The detective said that on that night, he intended to hurt us. He felt invaded. He was angry because, in his mind, we had taken over his home. The scratching sound Jordan heard, it wasn't him trying to get in. It was him trying to push the panel open, from inside my son's closet wall. We didn't go back for the rest of the summer, not because we thought it would happen again, but because we were all too shaken. I couldn't bring myself to take my wife or kids back there, and they didn't argue. The boys, especially Jordan, had nightmares for weeks. I hired a construction crew. They didn't just seal the entrance. I told them to pour concrete and close off that entire crawlspace for good. Only after that was done did I finally start to breathe a little easier. We returned to the house this summer, and I'm happy to say things have been normal again, or at least as close to normal as they'll ever get. But that sense of total safety, it's gone. Sometimes, late at night, when the old wood creaks and shifts, my heart still skips a beat. The house, my father's gift, now carries a darker memory, a chilling reminder that sometimes the monster isn't under your bed. It's inside your walls. I grew up in the countryside, the kind of place where you could ride your bike for miles without seeing another soul. Like a lot of people. Summer was always my favorite season. It still is, really. But I haven't lived out there for years, and somehow, summer's lost a bit of its magic. Most of what made it special for me was tied to that rural life. The warmth, the quiet, the wide open emptiness. There was something about it I loved, something I could never find in the city. It's hard to explain. I felt isolated, but in a good way. Like I had my own little corner of the earth. Like I could disappear for hours, and no one would ever know. Summer nights were always the best. The darkness just added to that sense of freedom and privacy that 16-year-old me craved so much. I had a friend back then named Taylor. She was a bit bolder than I was, always pushing boundaries in small, reckless ways. I was the cautious one, and Taylor was the kind of person who'd say, "It'll be fine," right before doing something dumb. Like the time she convinced me to swim in an old quarry pond, the one with a giant "no trespassing" sign and rumors about what was at the bottom. Just stupid teenage dares, but she was always the one leading the charge. Then, one random night in July, we decided to go stargazing. Just the two of us, our bikes, and a bottle of wine. It wasn't the first time we'd done it, honestly. It had become kind of our ritual, a secret escape from the dull streets and judgmental eyes of our small town. At least, until what I'm about to tell you happened. Looking back now, that was probably one of the last times we ever went stargazing together. We didn't have a plan, just a direction. We wanted somewhere new. Our old spots had started to lose their charm. Taylor said she knew a good place, somewhere past the edge of town. Some patch of abandoned farmland where no one would bother us. It used to be a working farm, she said, but something happened to the family who owned it. A tragedy, apparently, and ever since then, the land had gone barren. People said nothing would grow there anymore. That, of course, made it exactly the kind of place Taylor loved. We left around 10 that night. I'm not sure how long we rode. Maybe 20 minutes? Maybe 30. The crunch of gravel under our tires was the only sound besides the crickets. As we pedaled farther from the faint glow of the town's streetlights, the darkness around us started to feel thick, almost heavy. We didn't stop until we'd passed everything you could call civilization. Then Taylor suddenly hit the brakes and told me we'd arrived. I wasn't really sure what she meant by arrived, because there wasn't a single landmark in sight. But somehow, it felt right. Just an open field, no houses, no fences, no livestock. Just tall grass and a sky full of stars. The kind of silence that's so deep it almost rings in your ears. We spread out a blanket, popped the cork with a little opener Taylor somehow remembered to bring, and passed around a cheap bottle of red wine. It didn't taste great, but it did the job. We lay there for a while, passing the bottle back and forth, pointing out constellations we half remembered the names of. Our goal on nights like that was always the same: to catch a shooting star. At one point, Taylor asked if I thought we'd actually see one. I told her probably not, but that we should keep looking anyway. They weren't that rare out there, but you still had to be paying attention. Star or no star, we were having an amazing night. The wine was definitely kicking in, and I started feeling that warm, fuzzy kind of drunk, the kind that makes time stop existing. Like I said earlier, this isn't really part of the story, but it's one of the few things I still remember clearly, so I'll tell it anyway. There was this brief, strange pause in the rhythm of the night. We were lying back, and Taylor looked at me in a way that made me wonder if she wanted something more than friendship. Growing up, I'd always suspected she might, but it had never been anything more than curiosity. Still, that night, the feeling was stronger than I remembered. The cricket seemed to go silent for just a second. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. People didn't talk about things like that where we came from. And besides, maybe I was just tipsy and reading too much into it. Just one deep breath, one quiet moment to soak it all in. But when I opened them, Taylor was gone. I mean gone. Not off using the bathroom, not fumbling with her phone somewhere in the dark, just gone. There was an empty patch of grass right beside me where she'd been. I noticed it instantly, because her bike was gone too. Mine was still lying next to the blanket, but where hers had been just seconds ago, there was nothing but weeds. I sat up fast, my heart hammering. My first thought was that she was trying to mess with me. "Taylor," I called out, my voice a little shaky. "This isn't funny." But even after I spun around a full circle, I couldn't see her anywhere. Nothing. Just the empty, silent field. That's when it hit me. That deep, unexplainable kind of fear. Not the startled kind, but something heavier. A sense of pure wrongness. The open field around me suddenly felt suffocating, and the calm beauty of the night had turned into something cold and claustrophobic. And that's when I noticed the other things. The stars. They looked dimmer. That's the part I can't forget. The sky was still there, but it felt off, like someone had turned down the brightness or smeared something over it. The stars didn't sparkle anymore. They looked flat, like tiny pinholes punched through black fabric. And the air was colder. Not the normal chill of night, but the kind that makes you feel like you've stepped into another version of the same place. A dead version. All the sounds were gone too. No crickets, no breeze, just a heavy, motionless silence. I know how crazy that sounds, but like I said, it's impossible to explain. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my back pocket. Maybe she texted me. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. But when the screen lit up, my blood ran cold. It was 3 a.m. Exactly 3 yak. That number, 3 yak. It's burned into my memory and probably always will be. Not 3:01, not 2:59, 3 o'clock. The so-called devil's hour. I blinked a few times, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Just minutes ago, it wasn't even midnight. How could almost 3 hours have passed in the 5 seconds I had my eyes closed? I just stared at the time, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd fallen asleep, but I knew I hadn't. I could still taste the wine, still feel the chill from that shooting star. No matter how drunk I was, there's no way I'd just pass out for 3 hours without noticing. And even if I had, would Taylor really have left me there, in the middle of nowhere? Not a chance. She'd never do that in a million years. I got to my feet, dizzy and panicked, and started yelling her name. "Taylor! Taylor!" My voice sounded thin, weak, like the thick air was swallowing every sound before it could go anywhere. No answer. I didn't know what to think. The only reasonable explanation was that she'd ditched me. But why? We hadn't argued. The mood had been good. Really good, honestly. I tried calling her phone over and over, but it never went through. Just endless beeps into the void. And then, I started to cry. Can you blame me? I didn't know what else to do. The fear had completely taken over. I grabbed my bike and started pedaling back home, trying not to lose it. That ride, the same half-hour trip we'd taken so casually earlier, felt like it lasted forever. It was probably the scariest ride of my life. Every tree, every shadow along the road looked twisted, like shapes reaching out to grab me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, that the field didn't want me to leave. I didn't dare look back. I just kept pedaling, my vision blurred with tears and sweat, until I finally hit my driveway, completely out of breath, and still with no idea what the hell had just happened. I went inside, locked the door, and went straight to bed, collapsing onto the mattress, drained, drunk, and terrified. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, dry mouth, and that familiar hangover haze. For one blissful moment, I managed to convince myself it had all been a bad dream. Maybe I'd just gotten too drunk, biked home alone, and Taylor had done the same. But then I saw my bike, still leaning against the house, caked with mud from the field, and reality came crashing back. It really happened. The first thing I did was text Taylor, expecting an apology, or at least an explanation. I was ready to be angry, to demand why she'd left me there, but what I got wasn't an apology. It was rage. She texted, word for word, "Where the hell did you go last night?" I just stared at it, confused. I texted back, telling her what I remembered, how I'd closed my eyes, opened them, and she was gone. How it was suddenly 3 in the morning. How I'd called for her, called her phone, and finally biked home in a panic. And then she sent something that's haunted me ever since. She said she's the one who woke up alone at 3 a.m. According to Taylor, she's the one who closed her eyes for a moment after we saw the shooting star. And when she opened them, I was gone. My bike was gone too. She said she yelled for me, thought maybe I'd stumbled off somewhere drunk. She waited for over an hour in the dark, getting angrier and more scared by the minute, until she finally rode home, furious and confused, thinking I'd ditched her for some reason. In her version of events, I disappeared into thin air, and I was absolutely convinced the same thing had happened to her. We met later that day, both of us exhausted and on edge. We tried piecing everything together, but nothing fit. We both had the same timeline, a moment right after midnight. Then suddenly, 3 a.m. We both remembered the same panic, the same isolation, and neither of us had any memory gap, except for that single blink. But here's the truly horrifying part. We both remembered trying to call each other. I swear I called her at least 5 times. She swears she did the same. But when we checked our phones, right there, face to face, there was nothing. No outgoing calls from my phone, no missed calls on hers, nothing. The call logs were blank for that entire window of time. It was as if those desperate calls we both remembered so vividly had never existed. That was the first real physical proof that something about reality itself had bent. We argued about it for a while, round and round, getting nowhere. How do you argue about 2 completely different realities when you both know yours is true? Eventually, we stopped. Or maybe we just gave up. But I think we were both far more shaken than either of us wanted to admit. Our friendship never really recovered after that night. We still hung out, but something had cracked. How can you fully trust someone when you can't even trust the world you shared with them? For months afterward, I'd lie awake at night, staring out my window, watching the stars, replaying that night over and over. Taylor and I went stargazing maybe once or twice after that, but it was never the same. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was unsettling. In a way, life went back to normal. We both moved on, but deep down, something stayed broken. Even now, years later, I still don't have an explanation for what happened. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in ghosts or cosmic glitches. But everyone I've ever told this story to jumps to the same conclusion, that it was something unnatural, a glitch in reality, a time slip, where somehow we both fell out of sync, each trapped in our own version of the same moments. And maybe they're right, but I really don't like to think about it. I have considered the possibility that she was lying, that she really did leave me there and made up the mirrored story to cover herself. But why? And how would she explain the missing call logs? Either way, I have always carried this deep, gnawing unease, like something happened to us that night, something we'll never fully understand. I haven't heard from Taylor in years. We lost touch after high school, but I'd bet my life that wherever she is, every now and then, she still wonders, what really happened to us on that summer night in the field?